Eleanor Easton pressed herself against the rough bark of the cottonwood tree, her breathing shallow and rapid as the sound of horse hooves thundered past on the dusty road below. She had been running for 3 days now, ever since she fled her family's ranch outside Austin, Texas, leaving behind nothing but a hastily scrawled note that simply read, "I cannot marry him." The year was 1876, and women did not simply refuse arranged marriages to wealthy cattle barons, especially when their fathers had already spent the dowry money on gambling debts. Her legs trembled beneath her torn skirt as she waited for the riders to pass. The sun beat down mercilessly on the Colorado landscape, so different from the Texas hill country she had known all her life. Her canteen was nearly empty, and she had not eaten since yesterday morning when she had stolen 2 apples from an orchard outside Pueblo. The guilt still gnawed at her, but survival had become more important than propriety. When silence finally settled over the road again, Eleanor emerged from her hiding spot and continued north on foot. Her brother James would not give up easily. He had his pride to consider, and the fact that she had embarrassed the family by running away from Chester Caldwell, a man 30 years her senior with 2 failed marriages behind him, and a reputation for cruelty that even reached the ears of sheltered young women like herself. Her father had ignored every protest, every tear, every desperate plea. The wedding was to be in 1 week, and she was expected to smile and obey like a good daughter should. But Eleanor had never been particularly good at obeying, much to her mother's dismay. At 20 years old, she had read every book in their small library twice over, had opinions on politics and cattle breeding that shocked the other ranchers' wives, and had once punched her cousin Thomas in the nose for trying to kiss her behind the barn. Her father called her willful. Her mother called her a trial. Eleanor called herself determined to choose her own fate. The road curved ahead, and she could see buildings in the distance. Her heart lifted slightly. A town meant water, food, and perhaps a place to rest without fear of rattlesnakes or wolves. As she drew closer, a weathered sign proclaimed she was entering Montrose, Colorado. The town was small but bustling with activity. Cowboys drove cattle through the main street while prospectors with dusty faces haggled over supplies outside the general store. A saloon's piano music drifted through the warm afternoon air, slightly off-key but cheerful. Eleanor pulled her bonnet lower over her face and tried to look purposeful as she walked down the wooden sidewalk. Her clothes were filthy and torn, marking her as either desperately poor or running from something. Either way, she attracted stares. A woman alone in a frontier town was unusual enough to warrant attention, and she felt every eye on her like a physical weight. "You look lost, miss," a gruff voice said beside her. Eleanor turned to find herself facing a weathered older woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense expression. She wore a practical dress and an apron stained with what looked like flour. "I am looking for work," Eleanor said, lifting her chin despite her exhaustion. "I can cook, clean, so keep accounts and work hard." The woman studied her for a long moment. "You are running from something." It was not a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. "Yes, madam. Your husband." "No, madam. An arranged marriage I could not accept." The woman's expression softened slightly. "I am Mrs. Harriet Cooper. I run the boarding house on 3rd Street. I could use help with the cooking and cleaning, but I cannot pay much." "Room and board would be payment enough," Eleanor said quickly. "And perhaps discretion." Mrs. Cooper nodded slowly. "I mind my own business, and I expect my boarders to do the same. Come along then. You look about ready to collapse, and you smell like you have been sleeping in barns." Eleanor followed her new employer through the town, relief flooding through her so intensely that her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. The boarding house was a two-story wooden structure, freshly painted and well-maintained. Inside, it smelled of bread and soap, clean and welcoming. Mrs. Cooper showed her to a small room under the eaves, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it had a lock on the door and a window that looked out over the mountains in the distance. "Clean yourself up," Mrs. Cooper said. "There is water in the basin and soap on the stand. I will bring you something to eat and one of my old dresses. Yours is fit only for rags now. Supper is at 6 and you can meet the other boarders then. We have rules here. No men in your room, no drinking, and no trouble. Understood?" "Yes, madam. Thank you, madam," after Mrs. Cooper left. Eleanor locked the door and sagged against it, finally allowing herself to feel the full weight of what she had done. She had left everything she knew, everyone she loved, except for her younger sister Margaret, who had helped her escape and had sworn to tell no one where she went. Margaret was only 16, sweet and obedient in ways Eleanor could never be, and their father's favorite because of it. Eleanor hoped desperately that her sister would not suffer consequences for helping her. She washed as best she could with the cold water and harsh soap, scrubbing away days of dirt and fear. Her reflection in the small mirror showed a stranger with hollow eyes and sunburned cheeks. Her dark hair, usually neatly pinned, hung in tangled waves down her back. She looked wild and desperate, nothing like the properly brought-up young lady she had been just days ago. The dress Mrs. Cooper brought was plain brown cotton, loose enough to fit comfortably and practical enough for hard work. Eleanor put it on gratefully, along with a clean apron and a fresh cap for her hair. By the time 6 o'clock arrived, she felt almost human again, though the exhaustion still pulled at her bones. The dining room held a long table set for 8. 3 of the seats were already occupied when Eleanor entered. Mrs. Cooper introduced her simply as Eleanor, a new employee, and the boarders nodded politely without asking questions. There was Mr. Henderson, an aging prospector who had given up searching for gold and now worked at the assay office. Miss Patricia Wells, a schoolteacher with kind eyes and a soft voice. And then there was Mason Ingram. He was not the most handsome man Eleanor had ever seen, but something about him immediately caught her attention. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and calloused hands that spoke of hard work. His hair was light brown, slightly too long, and his eyes were a startling gray-blue that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, clean but well-worn, and when he stood to nod politely at her introduction, his movements were economical and confident. "Madam," he said simply, his voice a low drawl that marked him as someone from farther south, perhaps Texas or New Mexico. Eleanor's heart stuttered, and she forced herself to nod calmly in return before taking her seat at the far end of the table. Throughout the meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and fresh bread, she felt his eyes on her occasionally, curious but not intrusive. The other boarders chattered about town news, about the upcoming territorial fair, about the new family that had moved in above the millinery shop. Eleanor stayed quiet, eating slowly and trying not to draw attention to herself. After dinner, she helped Mrs. Cooper clear the dishes and wash them in the kitchen. The older woman worked beside her in companionable silence for a while before speaking. "Mason Ingram is the foreman at the Double Creek Ranch, about 5 miles north of town," she said without preamble. "He has been boarding here for 3 years, ever since he came up from New Mexico. Good man, honest and hardworking, sends most of his pay back to his family. His father died in the war and his mother is struggling to keep their small farm going with his 3 younger sisters." Eleanor did not ask why Mrs. Cooper was telling her this. She simply nodded and continued scrubbing the dishes. "He asked about you," Mrs. Cooper continued. "Wanted to know if you were in trouble. I told him you were under my protection and to mind his business, but he is the type who notices things, and he is the type who helps when he thinks someone needs it." "I do not need help," Eleanor said quietly. "I just need to disappear." "That is harder than you might think in a small town, Mrs. Cooper replied. "People notice strangers. People talk. If someone comes looking for you, questions will be asked and answered." Eleanor's hands stilled in the soapy water. "What should I do?" "Work hard, keep your head down, and try to become part of the community as quickly as possible. People protect their own. Right now, you are a stranger. Make yourself one of us, and you will have protection without even asking for it." Over the next 2 weeks, Eleanor threw herself into her work with determined energy. She rose before dawn to help Mrs. Cooper prepare breakfast for the boarders, spent her days cleaning rooms and doing laundry, and learned to bake bread that did not turn into heavy bricks in the oven. Her hands, unused to such labor, developed blisters that hardened into calluses. Her back ached from hauling water and scrubbing floors, but she welcomed the exhaustion that let her sleep without dreaming of her father's angry face or Chester Caldwell's cold smile. She saw Mason Ingram every morning at breakfast and every evening at dinner. He worked long days at the ranch, leaving before sunrise and returning as the sun set over the mountains. He spoke little but listened much, and she noticed that the other boarders seemed to like and respect him. Mr. Henderson often asked his advice on horse trading. Miss Wells trusted him to walk her home when she stayed late grading papers at the boarding house's dining table. Even Mrs. Cooper, who showed favoritism to no one, seemed to have a soft spot for the quiet cowboy. Eleanor tried not to watch him, but it was difficult. There was something solid and reassuring about his presence. He had gentle hands despite their roughness, always careful when passing dishes at the table or holding the door for the ladies. His rare smiles transformed his serious face into something warm and approachable. And his eyes, those startling gray-blue eyes, held a kindness that made her chest ache with an emotion she could not name. One evening, 3 weeks after her arrival in Montrose, Eleanor was hanging laundry in the backyard when she heard raised voices from the street. Her hands froze on the wet sheet she was pinning to the line. The voices were male, demanding and asking questions. About a young woman, dark-haired, 20 years old, running from Texas. Terror locked her muscles. She dropped the sheet back into the basket and looked wildly around for escape. The back fence was too high to climb quickly. The house was too far, and the voices were getting closer, coming around the side of the building. "You seem upset about something," Mason's voice said from directly behind her, making her jump. He had appeared silently, still dressed in his work clothes and dusty from the trail. His eyes were serious and assessing. "Those men out front are asking about a runaway bride. Seems her family is mighty determined to find her and bring her back to Texas." Eleanor's breath came in short gasps. "Please," she whispered, "please do not tell them I am here." He studied her face for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant he made his decision. "Come with me," he said quietly. "Stay close and do not say a word." He took her elbow and guided her quickly toward the back door of the boarding house, but they heard footsteps inside. Mrs. Cooper's voice raised in protest, and the heavy tread of men who would not be denied. Mason changed direction immediately, leading Eleanor toward the barn where Mrs. Cooper kept her horse and a milk cow. Inside the dim, hay-scented space, he lifted her easily onto the ladder to the loft. "Hide in the back corner, behind the hay bales," he instructed in a low voice. "Do not make a sound. No matter what you hear, I will handle this." Eleanor scrambled into the loft and burrowed behind the stacked hay as deeply as she could, her heart hammering so hard she was sure it could be heard throughout the barn. Below, she heard Mason moving around casually, heard him start whistling a tuneless melody as if he had not a care in the world. The barn door creaked open. "You there," a voice called out, her brother James's voice. Eleanor pressed her hand over her mouth to stifle her gasp. "Have you seen a young woman, dark hair, about 20 years old? She would be alone and probably in rough shape." "I have seen quite a few women in this town," Mason replied calmly. "You might need to be more specific." "Do not play games with me, cowboy," James snapped. "Her name is Eleanor Easton, and she ran away from her obligations in Texas. Our family has been searching for her for weeks. We have reason to believe she came through this area." "Easton, you said." Mason's voice was thoughtful. "Cannot say the name is familiar. But then I am just a ranch hand. I work cattle, not people. You might want to try the sheriff's office down the street." "We already spoke to the sheriff," another voice said. One of the ranch hands her father employed, though Eleanor could not place which one. "He said to ask around at the boarding houses and hotels. Said a woman matching her description was seen entering this establishment a few weeks back." "Lots of women come through Mrs. Cooper's boarding house," Mason said easily. "She runs a respectable place. Good food, clean rooms. If you want to ask her directly, she is probably in the house right now, though I should warn you, she does not take kindly to men barging in and making demands." "We already spoke to her," James said, frustration clear in his voice. "She claims she has not seen Eleanor, but that old woman could be lying to protect her. Women stick together in these matters. If Mrs. Cooper says she has not seen your sister, then she has not seen your sister," Mason said, and there was steel beneath the casual tone now. "That woman does not lie, and I do not appreciate you suggesting otherwise." "We will search this barn," James declared. "Step aside." "I do not think so," Mason said quietly. "This is private property and you have no authority here. You want to search the premises, you go get the sheriff and a warrant. Otherwise, you need to move along." There was a tense silence. Eleanor held her breath, pressed so far back into the corner that hay poked through her dress and scratched her skin. She heard shuffling feet, whispered consultation, and then James spoke again. "We are staying at the hotel on Main Street," he said coldly. "If you happen to remember seeing anyone matching my sister's description, there is a $50 reward for information leading to her return. Think about it, cowboy. That is probably more than you make in 2 months of breaking your back for some rancher." "I will keep that in mind," Mason said neutrally. "Now, if you will excuse me, I have chores to finish before supper." The footsteps retreated and the barn door closed, but Mason did not call up to Eleanor immediately. She heard him moving around below, the sounds of normal evening chores, feeding and watering the animals. It seemed like an eternity before his voice finally drifted up to the loft. "They are gone, but they are watching the house from across the street. You need to stay hidden until full dark. I will come back for you then." Eleanor did not dare respond, but she heard him leave the barn. Alone in the growing darkness, she finally let herself cry silently, overwhelmed by fear and gratitude in equal measure. Mason had protected her without hesitation, had lied to her brother's face, and had turned down a substantial reward. Why would he do that for a stranger? What did he expect in return? The question circled endlessly in her mind as the light faded from the cracks between the barn boards and night settled over Montrose. She dozed fitfully, exhausted and uncomfortable, until the sound of the door opening jolted her awake. "Eleanor," Mason called softly. "It is safe now. Come down." She climbed down the ladder stiffly, hay falling from her hair and dress. In the lantern light, she could see Mason clearly for the first time since the confrontation. His face was serious, thoughtful, and she realized with a start that he had been planning. "Your brother and his man are camped outside the hotel," he said without preamble. "They will be watching the boarding house and asking questions all over town tomorrow. You cannot stay here safely anymore." "I have nowhere else to go," Eleanor said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her throat. "Yes, you do," Mason replied. "You can come to the Double Creek Ranch. My boss, Mr. Thomas Irwin, is always looking for help. His wife died 2 years ago, and the house has been practically falling apart since then. He has 2 young children who need looking after, and the ranch hands have been trying to keep up with cooking and cleaning on top of their regular work. He would hire you in a heartbeat." "But my brother will search the ranches," Eleanor protested. "He will find me." "Not if you are not Eleanor Easton anymore," Mason said. "Out here, people do not ask too many questions about where you came from or what you left behind. If you show up as Emily Everett, my cousin from New Mexico who has come to work for the Double Creek, no one will think twice about it. Your brother is looking for a runaway woman on her own. He is not looking for a ranch employee with family connections." Eleanor stared at him, hope and disbelief warring in her chest. "Why are you doing this? You do not even know me." Mason was quiet for a moment, his gray-blue eyes steady on her face. "I know enough," he said finally. "I know you are running from something that frightens you enough to leave everything behind. I know Mrs. Cooper trusts you, and her judgment is better than most people's. And I know that no woman should be forced into a marriage she does not want. My youngest sister, Sarah, she almost was forced into something similar. A neighbor twice her age wanted to marry her to settle a debt. I worked for 2 years, sending every penny home until we had enough to pay off what was owed and she could choose for herself. She married a good man last spring, someone she actually loved, so I know what it is like to fight for that choice." "I do not know how to thank you," Eleanor whispered, her eyes burning with tears. "You can start by gathering whatever belongings you have," Mason said practically. "We leave in an hour while it is still dark. By the time your brother wakes up, you will be long gone, and there will be no trail to follow." They made it to the Double Creek Ranch just as dawn was breaking over the eastern peaks, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Eleanor, now Emily, was exhausted from the ride, unused to spending hours on horseback. Mason had kept them to back trails and dry creek beds, paths that would show no tracks. He had been silent for most of the journey, focused on getting them there safely, but his presence had been steady and reassuring beside her. The ranch house was a sprawling structure, built of logs and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It had clearly once been well maintained, but now showed signs of neglect. The flower beds were overgrown, the porch railing needed repair, and several windows were so dusty they looked nearly opaque. Beyond the house, a barn, stable, bunkhouse, and various outbuildings spread across the property. Cattle grazed on the hills in the distance, and Eleanor could hear the lowing of more animals in the nearby pastures. A man emerged from the house as they approached, tall and broad-shouldered with graying hair and a weathered face. He looked to be in his late 40s, with kind eyes that were currently shadowed with worry and exhaustion. "Mason," he said by way of greeting, "you are back early and with company." "Mr. Irwin, this is my cousin Emily Everett from New Mexico," Mason said smoothly as he dismounted. "She is recently widowed and looking for a fresh start. I thought she might be a good fit for the position we discussed, helping with the house and the children." Eleanor climbed down from her horse, her legs trembling slightly, and extended her hand to Mr. Irwin. "I am a hard worker, sir, and I have experience with cooking, cleaning, and caring for children. If you are willing to give me a chance, I promise you will not regret it." Mr. Irwin shook her hand, his grip gentle despite his size. "Any relation of Mason's is welcome here," he said. "He has told me about his family in New Mexico. I am sorry for your loss, Mrs. Everett. As for the position, I admit I desperately need help. My children, Thomas Jr. and little Anna, they need a woman's care, and this house has not been properly managed since my wife passed. I can offer you room and board plus $30 a month. Does that suit you?" "More than suits me, sir," Eleanor said, relief flooding through her. "When would you like me to start? How about right now?" Mr. Irwin said with a tired smile. "The children are still asleep, but they will be up soon and breakfast needs making. Mason can show you where everything is. He practically lives in the kitchen these days, trying to cook for all of us." Over the following days, Eleanor threw herself into her new role with determined energy. The house was a disaster, neglected for too long by men who had no time or skill for household management. She scrubbed floors, washed mountains of laundry, organized pantries, and coaxed the kitchen stove into proper working order. Thomas Jr., called Tommy, was 7 years old, serious and responsible beyond his years. Little Anna was 4, with her father's kind eyes and a sweet temperament that melted Eleanor's heart immediately. The children were wary at first, unused to having a woman in the house again, but Eleanor won them over gradually with patient attention and good food. She taught Anna to braid her hair and told her stories before bed. She helped Tommy with his reading lessons and praised his careful work with the ranch animals. Within a week, they followed her around like devoted puppies, and she found herself falling in love with them as easily as breathing. Mason was a constant presence, always nearby but never intrusive. He ate breakfast and dinner at the main house, as did several of the other ranch hands, and Eleanor found herself cooking for a dozen hungry men twice a day. It was exhausting work, but satisfying. The men were polite and appreciative, their rough manners softening in the presence of a woman who treated them with respect and fed them properly. She noticed that Mason always volunteered for the chores that kept him close to the house. He repaired the porch railing without being asked. He fixed the squeaky hinge on the kitchen door. He brought her fresh vegetables from the ranch's struggling garden and showed her where the root cellar was stocked with preserves from better days. He was thoughtful in ways that made her heart ache, and she found herself watching for his arrival each evening, listening for his voice among the other ranch hands. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival at the Double Creek, Eleanor was washing dishes after dinner when Mason came into the kitchen carrying firewood for the stove. The other hands had retreated to the bunkhouse, and Mr. Irwin had taken the children to bed. They were alone for the first time since that night in the barn. "Your brother left Montrose 3 days ago," Mason said quietly as he stacked the wood neatly beside the stove. "I heard from one of the hands who went into town for supplies. He and his man searched for another week after you disappeared, then gave up and headed back to Texas." Eleanor's hands stilled in the dishwater. "Are you certain?" "As certain as I can be, but you should probably stay on the ranch for a while longer, just to be safe. No trips into town where someone might recognize you and send word to your family." "I understand," Eleanor said softly. Then, because she needed to say it, "Thank you, Mason, for everything you have done for me. I can never repay you." He turned to face her, and in the lamplight his eyes were very blue. "I do not want repayment, Emily." He used the false name carefully, reminding her to maintain the deception even in private. "I just want you to be safe and happy. You deserve that much. Why do you care?" She asked, the question that had been haunting her finally escaping. "I am nothing to you, a stranger who brought trouble to your doorstep." Mason was silent for a long moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You are not nothing," he said finally. "And you have not been a stranger for a long time now." He left before she could respond, and Eleanor stood alone in the kitchen, her heart pounding and her hands trembling in the cooling dishwater. She recognized the feeling that had been growing inside her for weeks now, the warmth that spread through her chest whenever he was near, the way her day felt brighter when he smiled at her, the hollow ache when he was out on the range and she did not see him until evening. She was falling in love with Mason Ingram, the quiet cowboy who had saved her without asking for anything in return. The realization terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Summer deepened into early autumn, and life at the Double Creek Ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Eleanor transformed the neglected house into a warm, welcoming home. She planted a late vegetable garden and preserved everything she could for the coming winter. She sewed new curtains for the windows and patched the holes in Tommy's trousers. She baked pies that made the ranch hands practically weep with gratitude, and she sang while she worked, old songs her mother had taught her, filling the house with music it had not heard in years. Mr. Irwin watched the transformation with evident relief and gratitude. He had been drowning in responsibility and grief, trying to run the ranch and care for his children simultaneously. With Eleanor managing the household, he could focus on the work he understood, and his children bloomed under her care. Tommy laughed more, and little Anna stopped crying for her mama at night. Mason's mother sent a letter in late September, addressed to him at the ranch. Eleanor was in the kitchen when he read it, and she saw his face transform with relief and joy. "Sarah had her baby," he said, looking up with a rare, brilliant smile. "A healthy boy. They named him Mason Matthew after me and her husband. She says everyone is doing well and the farm is thriving. My mother says I should be proud of what I helped them accomplish." "You should be," Eleanor said warmly. "You saved your family, Mason. That is no small thing." "I could not do it all," he said, his smile fading slightly. "I sent money, but I was not there. I have not seen my sisters in 3 years. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice, leaving them to work out here." Eleanor set down the bread, though she was kneading, and wiped her hands on her apron. "You made the only choice you could, and because of that choice, your sister married for love and your mother kept her farm. They know what you sacrificed for them. That is love, Mason, real love, the kind that costs something." He looked at her for a long moment, something intense and questioning in his eyes. "What about you, Emily? Will you ever be able to go back to your family, to make peace with them?" The question pierced her heart. She thought of her mother, probably worried sick despite her disapproval of Eleanor's stubbornness. She thought of Margaret, sweet Margaret, who had helped her escape. She even thought of her father, whose stern face probably hid more hurt than anger by now. But then she thought of Chester Caldwell, and she knew the answer. "Not while they expect me to marry that man," she said quietly. "Maybe someday if they accept that I will choose my own path, but I cannot go back to being someone's property, someone's bargaining chip to pay off debts. I would rather live as Emily Everett, unknown and free, than as Eleanor Easton in a cage. Even if it means giving up everything you knew, everyone you loved." "I have found new things to know," Eleanor said, meeting his eyes directly. "New people to love." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken words. Mason took a step toward her, then stopped, seeming to wrestle with something internal. Finally, he spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "Emily, I need to tell you something. I have tried to keep my distance, tried to maintain proper boundaries, but I cannot anymore. Every day I watch you with the children, see you transforming this house into a home, listen to you sing while you work, and I fall a little more. I know I have no right to feel this way. You came here to escape one unwanted situation, and the last thing you need is another man making demands on your life. But I need you to know that I care for you. More than care. I am in love with you, and if you could ever feel the same, I would count myself the luckiest man in Colorado." Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. All the feelings she had been trying to suppress, trying to deny, came flooding to the surface in an overwhelming wave. "Mason," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I do feel the same. I have for weeks now. I thought I was betraying your kindness by having such feelings. You saved me, gave me a new life, and I repaid you by falling in love with you." "That is not repayment," Mason said, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. "That is a gift, the best gift I have ever received." He cupped her face gently in his calloused hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized were falling. "May I kiss you?" "Yes," Eleanor breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle and reverent. The kiss was everything a first kiss should be, tender and promising, full of hope for a future neither of them had dared to imagine. When they finally pulled apart, Eleanor was trembling, and Mason's hands were unsteady where they still cradled her face. "We have to be careful," she said, reality crashing back in. "I am still hiding, still using a false name. Your kindness has already put you in a difficult position. If we pursue this, if we try to build something together, we will be building it on a foundation of lies." "Then we tell the truth," Mason said firmly. "Not to everyone, but to the people who matter. Mr. Irwin deserves to know who you really are and why you are here. He is a good man and he will understand. We can trust him." Eleanor wanted to believe him, but fear held her back. "What if he feels deceived? What if he sends me away?" "He would not do that. The children love you, and this ranch runs better with you here than it has in years. He values loyalty and hard work, and you have given him both. Your past does not change that." They told Mr. Irwin that evening after the children were asleep. They sat at the kitchen table while Eleanor, her voice shaking at first but growing stronger, explained everything. Her real name, the arranged marriage, her flight from Texas, Mason's protection, and the false identity he had created for her. She left out nothing, laying bare all her secrets and her shame. Mr. Irwin listened without interrupting, his weathered face thoughtful. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, and Eleanor felt her heart sink. She had ruined everything with her honesty. "I appreciate your trust in telling me this," Mr. Irwin said finally. "And I am sorry for what you have endured, Miss Easton. No woman should be forced into marriage against her will. It is barbaric, no matter how common the practice." He paused, then smiled slightly. "However, as far as I and everyone else in this territory are concerned, you are Emily Everett, my valued employee and Mason's cousin. Your past is your own business, and I see no reason to share it with anyone. You are not angry that we deceived you?" Eleanor asked, hardly daring to believe his words. "You deceived me to survive," Mr. Irwin said gently. "That is different from deceiving someone for personal gain. Mason trusted his instincts about your character, and those instincts have proven correct. You have been nothing but honest and hardworking since you arrived here. Your real name does not change who you are." He looked between them, his eyes sharpening slightly. "Though I am guessing there is another reason you chose to reveal this truth now." Mason reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand, his touch warm and solid. "I love her, sir, and she loves me. We want to build a life together, but we could not do that while keeping you in the dark. You deserve to know the truth about who is living under your roof." Mr. Irwin's face softened into a genuine smile. "Mason, you are like a son to me. These past 3 years you have been the backbone of this ranch. And Miss Easton, Emily, whatever name you choose, you have given my children something I could not. You have given them stability and love when they needed it most. If you two have found happiness together, I could not be more pleased." Eleanor felt tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of relief and joy. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for understanding." "Now," Mr. Irwin said, his tone becoming practical, "we should discuss the future. If you two are serious about building a life together, we need to think about what that looks like. Marriage would be the logical step, but there are complications with your situation." "We cannot marry under my real name," Eleanor said. "The marriage would be recorded, and if my family ever searched official records, they would find me." "But we could marry under the name Emily Everett," Mason said thoughtfully. "Out here, the authorities do not dig too deep into backgrounds. A woman's word about her identity is generally accepted. It would not be legal in the strictest sense, since it would not be your real name, but it would be binding in the eyes of the community and the church." Eleanor had not thought that far ahead, her mind still reeling from the confession and Mr. Irwin's acceptance. "Are you asking me to marry you?" Mason turned to face her fully, his gray-blue eyes serious and full of emotion. "Yes. I know we have not courted properly, and this is all happening fast, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you, Eleanor. I want to build a life with you, have a family with you, grow old with you. Will you marry me?" Her heart felt like it might burst from her chest. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 6 weeks later in the small church in Montrose. Eleanor wore a simple dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Cooper had insisted on buying for her as a wedding gift. The older woman had been delighted by the news, claiming she had known from the start that Mason and Eleanor were meant for each other. The ceremony was small and intimate, attended only by Mr. Irwin and his children, Mrs. Cooper, a few of the ranch hands, and the schoolteacher, Miss Wells. Eleanor spoke her vows as Emily Everett, and while the name felt strange on her tongue, the promises she made were entirely real. She pledged herself to Mason with her whole heart, holding nothing back. Mason's vows were simple and heartfelt. "I promise to protect you, provide for you, and love you for all the days of my life. I promise to give you the freedom to choose your own path, and to walk beside you wherever that path leads. You are my heart, Emily, and I will spend the rest of my life proving worthy of the gift you have given me." There was not a dry eye in the church when the minister pronounced them husband and wife. Mr. Irwin had gifted them the small foreman's cabin on the edge of the ranch property as a wedding present. It was a cozy 2-room structure with a stone fireplace and windows that looked out over the mountains. Mason and several of the ranch hands had spent weeks repairing and improving it, adding shelves and a proper bed frame, fixing the roof and chimney. Eleanor had sewn curtains and cushions, had stocked the small kitchen with supplies, and had made it into a home that was entirely theirs. Their wedding night was tender and sweet, full of whispered promises and gentle discoveries. Mason was patient and reverent, treating Eleanor like something precious. She had been afraid, knowing only the dire warnings her mother had given her about a wife's duty, but Mason made her feel cherished and desired in equal measure. They came together with love and trust, and Eleanor finally understood what it meant to give yourself to someone freely, without coercion or duty, simply because your heart demanded it. In the days and weeks that followed, they settled into married life with surprising ease. Eleanor continued her work at the main house, caring for the children and managing the household, but now she returned each evening to the cabin and to Mason's arms. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's thoughts and dreams. Mason told her about his childhood in New Mexico, about the father he barely remembered who had died at Gettysburg, about his determination to provide better for his family. Eleanor told him about growing up in Texas, about the books she loved, and the dreams she'd had before her father's gambling debts destroyed them all. Winter came to Colorado with a vengeance, bringing deep snow and bitter cold. The ranch work became harder, and Mason often came home exhausted and half-frozen. Eleanor would have hot food waiting and a warm fire burning, and she would help him out of his frozen clothes and wrap him in quilts until he stopped shivering. Those winter nights, huddled together against the cold, were some of the happiest of her life. They were poor and their future was uncertain, but they had each other, and that was enough. In late January, Eleanor began to feel unwell in the mornings. At first, she attributed it to something she had eaten, but as the nausea persisted and her courses failed to arrive, realization dawned. She was carrying Mason's child. The news filled her with joy and terror in equal measure. A child was a blessing, but it was also a complication. What if someone realized Emily Everett had only been in Colorado for 8 months? What if questions were asked that she could not answer? What if her family somehow discovered her through the birth records? Mason's reaction, when she told him, swept away all her fears. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy, then immediately set her down and asked if he had hurt her or the baby. His face was transformed with wonder as he placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "A child," he said, his voice full of awe. "Our child. Emily, you have made me the happiest man alive." "You are not worried," she asked, "about the complications this might cause?" "I am worried about keeping you healthy and safe," he said firmly. "Everything else we will figure out together. This baby is a blessing, and I will not let fear steal our joy." Mr. Irwin was equally delighted by the news, as were the children. Tommy asked if he could teach the baby to ride horses, while Anna was convinced the baby would be a girl she could play dolls with. Mrs. Cooper immediately began knitting tiny blankets and booties. The whole community seemed to rally around the expectant couple, offering advice and support and gifts. As spring arrived and Eleanor's belly swelled with new life, she felt truly happy for the first time in years. She had a husband who loved her, children who adored her, a community that accepted her, and a baby on the way. The life she had been running toward, barely daring to hope for, had somehow materialized around her, but peace never lasted forever. One warm day in late April, Eleanor was hanging laundry outside the main house when a rider approached. She looked up with a friendly smile, expecting one of the neighboring ranchers or perhaps a supply delivery. The smile froze on her face when she recognized the man on the horse. Chester Caldwell sat astride a magnificent black stallion, looking older and meaner than she remembered. His cold eyes swept over her, taking in her swollen belly and simple work dress, and his lip curled in disgust. "So this is where you have been hiding, Eleanor," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Playing house with some cowboy, spreading your legs like a common whore." Eleanor's hand instinctively went to her stomach, protecting the life within. "You need to leave," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have nothing to say to you." "Oh, but I have plenty to say to you," Chester said, dismounting with predatory grace. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you have caused? Your father had to return my dowry payment, which he did not have, of course. I have spent months tracking you down, following rumors and hints. I almost gave up, but then I heard about Mason Ingram's cousin from New Mexico, the mysterious widow who appeared out of nowhere. It was not hard to put the pieces together." "I will not go back with you," Eleanor said, backing toward the house. "I am married now. That baby you are sneering at is my husband's child. You have no claim on me. You think your sham marriage protects you." Chester laughed, a harsh sound without humor. "You are not Emily Everett. That marriage is not legal. In the eyes of the law, you are still Eleanor Easton, and we had a contract. Your father accepted my payment, and you belong to me." "I belong to no one," Eleanor said, her fear transforming into anger. "I am not property to be bought and sold. I am a human being with the right to choose my own life." "You have no rights," Chester said coldly. "You are a woman and a runaway. Now you can come with me peacefully, or I can have the law involved. I have a judge in Texas who owes me favors. He will annul your false marriage and enforce our contract. You will marry me, and that bastard you are carrying will grow up knowing his mother is a whore who tried to run away from her obligations." Eleanor heard the kitchen door slam open behind her. Mason strode out, his face dark with fury, followed by Mr. Irwin and two of the ranch hands who had been working nearby. "Get off my property," Mason said, his voice deadly quiet. "Now." Chester's eyes flicked to Mason, assessing him. "You must be the cowboy who thought he could steal another man's bride. Did she tell you about me? About the contract her father signed?" "She told me everything," Mason said, positioning himself between Chester and Eleanor. "She told me about a man twice her age trying to buy himself a young wife. She told me about refusing to be sold like cattle, and she told me about running for her life because no one in her family cared about her happiness or her future." "Her happiness is not relevant," Chester said dismissively. "Contracts must be honored." "Not contracts that treat women like property," Mr. Irwin said firmly. "We do not hold with such things here. The lady has made her choice and she chose Mason. That is the end of the discussion." Chester's face flushed with anger. "This is not over. I will bring the law down on all of you. Aiding a runaway, harboring someone under false pretenses. I will make sure every one of you pays for this." "You could try," Mason said, his hand resting on the gun at his hip in a casual gesture that was nonetheless threatening. "But I wonder how that would look. A wealthy man trying to force a pregnant woman back to Texas to marry him against her will. The newspapers would have a field day with that story. And judges in Colorado might not be as sympathetic to your claims as the ones you have bought in Texas." Chester's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You are making a mistake, cowboy. I always get what I want." "Not this time," Mason said flatly. "Emily is my wife, carrying my child. I will protect her with everything I have. If you come near her again, you will regret it." The two men stared at each other, the air thick with tension. Finally, Chester turned back to his horse. "This is not finished," he said as he mounted. "You have not won, Eleanor. I will be back, and when I return, I will have the law on my side." He rode away, and Eleanor's legs gave out. Mason caught her before she fell, lowering her gently to sit on the porch steps. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, delayed terror flooding through her now that the immediate danger had passed. "He is going to destroy everything," she gasped. "He is going to take me back, take the baby, ruin all of you for helping me. This is my fault. I should never have stayed. I should have kept running." "Stop," Mason said firmly, kneeling in front of her and taking her face in his hands. "You are not going anywhere. We will figure this out. You are not alone anymore, Eleanor. You have me. You have Mr. Irwin. You have this whole community behind you. We will find a way." Over the next weeks, they consulted with a lawyer in Montrose, a sharp-minded woman named Margaret Harding who specialized in defending women in difficult situations. She listened to Eleanor's story with a sympathetic ear but a realistic assessment. "The contract your father signed is problematic," she admitted. "In Texas, such arrangements still carry weight, especially if money changed hands. However, you are now in Colorado, where we have different laws and attitudes. Your marriage to Mason, even under an assumed name, establishes residency and intent. The fact that you are carrying his child further complicates any attempt to remove you from this territory." "But can Chester Caldwell force me to go back?" Eleanor asked. "He can try," Mrs. Harding said. but he would need to convince a Colorado judge that you should be returned to Texas to face charges of breach of contract. That is not impossible, but it is difficult, especially if we can demonstrate that the original contract was signed under duress and that you had legitimate reasons to fear for your safety if the marriage proceeded. What kind of reasons? Mason asked. Any evidence that Mr. Caldwell has a history of violence or abuse, Mrs. Harding explained. Testimony from people who knew about his previous marriages and why they ended. Documentation of your father's financial situation that would prove you were being sold to pay his debts. The more we can demonstrate that you were fleeing abuse rather than simply breaking a promise, the stronger your case becomes. Eleanor thought of the rumors she had heard back in Texas, whispered stories about Chester's first wife who died under suspicious circumstances, about the second wife who fled in the night and was never seen again. She had never sought confirmation of those stories, had tried to convince herself they were just gossip, but now they might be the key to her freedom. There were stories, she said slowly, about his previous wives, nothing confirmed but people talked. And there was a woman in Austin, a seamstress, who warned me not to marry him. She said he was dangerous, that he hurt women. I did not know how to ask for proof without making my father more angry. Find that seamstress, Mrs. Harding said to Mason. Find anyone who will testify about Caldwell's character. We need to build a case that paints him as someone Eleanor had legitimate reason to fear. Meanwhile, I will file paperwork establishing Emily Everett's legal residency in Colorado and her marriage to you, Mason. The more documentation we create of your life here, the harder it will be for anyone to claim Eleanor Easton is the same person. Mason made the journey to Texas in early May, leaving Eleanor behind with Mr. Irwin's promise to protect her. It was the longest 2 weeks of Eleanor's life. She worked to distract herself, but every sound made her jump. Every stranger who passed the ranch sent her into panic. She barely slept, terrified that Chester would return with the sheriff and drag her away while Mason was gone. But Mason did return, exhausted and travel-worn, with a stack of documents and sworn statements. He had found the seamstress, who told him a horrifying story about Chester's second wife, a woman who had come to her shop covered in bruises, begging for help to escape. He had tracked down the doctor who had examined Chester's first wife after her death, who admitted privately that the injuries were not consistent with the fall downstairs that had been claimed. He had even found Eleanor's sister Margaret, who had provided a tearful statement about their father's gambling debts and the arguments she had overheard about selling Eleanor to the highest bidder. Margaret sends her love, Mason told Eleanor as they sat together in their cabin, going through the statements by lamplight. She said to tell you she is proud of you for fighting for your happiness, and she made me promise to take care of you and the baby. Eleanor cried as she read her sister's statement, written in Margaret's careful script. It detailed everything: their father's mounting debts, Chester's cruel reputation, Eleanor's desperate pleas to avoid the marriage, and Margaret's belief that their father cared more about his pride than his daughter's safety. It was exactly the kind of testimony they needed. Mrs. Harding compiled everything into a formal case file and filed preliminary paperwork with the territorial court. She warned them that Chester could still cause trouble, but she was confident they had enough evidence to fight any attempt at extradition. Chester did return in June, accompanied by a lawyer from Texas and carrying legal documents demanding Eleanor's return. But Mrs. Harding was ready for him. She filed counterclaims alleging abuse and trafficking, presented the testimony from witnesses, and argued passionately before the territorial judge that sending Eleanor back to Texas would be tantamount to condemning her to a life of abuse. The hearing was tense and emotional. Eleanor had to testify, her swollen belly making it difficult to sit comfortably in the witness box. She told her story simply and honestly, leaving out nothing. She described her father's debts, Chester's cold eyes, the fear that had driven her to run. She spoke about finding safety with Mason, about the life they had built together, about the baby she was carrying and the future she was fighting for. Chester's lawyer tried to paint her as a liar and a manipulator, a woman who had seduced Mason to escape her legal obligations. But Mrs. Harding destroyed that narrative by calling witness after witness who spoke about Eleanor's character, her hard work, her devotion to the Irwin children, and Mason's steady, honorable nature. Mr. Irwin testified about how she had transformed his household and how his children had healed under her care. Mrs. Cooper spoke about Eleanor's desperation the night she had arrived in Montrose, clearly running from something terrible. Even the ranch hands testified, rough men unused to courtrooms, speaking awkwardly but honestly about how Miss Emily was a good woman who deserved to be left in peace. The judge, a gray-haired man named Samuel Warren, listened to everything with careful attention. When all the testimony was concluded, he took only an hour to render his decision. The court finds that Miss Eleanor Easton, now known as Mrs. Emily Ingram, had reasonable cause to believe she was in danger, and that the marriage contract in question was not entered into freely by both parties, Judge Warren said formally. The contract is hereby declared void and unenforceable in this territory. Furthermore, the court finds that Mrs. Ingram has established legal residency in Colorado, and that her marriage to Mr. Mason Ingram, while conducted under an assumed name, was entered into with good faith and honest intent. The marriage is recognized as valid and binding. Mr. Caldwell's petition for extradition is denied, and he is hereby ordered to cease any further contact with Mrs. Ingram or her family. Eleanor burst into tears, relief flooding through her so intensely she felt lightheaded. Mason pulled her into his arms, holding her as she sobbed against his chest. They had won. She was free. The nightmare was finally over. Chester left Colorado that same day, his face twisted with fury but powerless to do anything more. Mrs. Harding warned them that he might try to appeal or cause trouble in other ways, but she believed the judge's ruling was solid enough to withstand scrutiny. In August, as the summer heat settled over the ranch, Eleanor gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, but when Mason placed their son in her arms for the first time, she forgot every moment of pain. He was perfect, with a cap of dark hair and Mason's gray-blue eyes already apparent even in his newborn face. "What should we name him?" Mason asked, his voice thick with emotion as he gazed at his son. Eleanor thought of everything they had endured to reach this moment, all the fear and struggle and eventual triumph. "James," she said softly, "after my brother." Despite everything, he was just doing what he thought was right, protecting the family name. I want to remember that even the people who hurt us often believe they are doing the right thing. It helps me forgive. James Mason Ingram, Mason said, testing the name. "It is perfect." Little James thrived, growing strong and healthy. Eleanor and Mason settled into the exhausting, joyful chaos of new parenthood. Mr. Irwin's children were fascinated by the baby, and even the rough ranch hands would stop by the cabin to admire him and bring awkward gifts of carved toys or soft blankets. 6 months after James was born, Eleanor received a letter from her sister Margaret. It was the first direct contact since Mason's visit to Texas, and Eleanor opened it with trembling hands. The letter explained that their father had died 3 months earlier, his health destroyed by drink and guilt. In his final days, he had expressed regret for how he had treated Eleanor, had admitted that his pride and his debts had mattered more to him than his daughter's happiness. He had asked Margaret to find Eleanor and tell her he was sorry, though he knew he did not deserve forgiveness. Eleanor cried over the letter, grieving the father she had lost long before his actual death, the man who had once bounced her on his knee and called her his clever girl. Mason held her while she mourned, offering no empty platitudes, just his solid presence and unconditional love. The letter also brought good news. Margaret was engaged to a kind man, a schoolteacher who had no debts and no expectations beyond a loving wife and partner. She was happy, truly happy, and she hoped Eleanor was too. She asked if they might write to each other, if perhaps someday they might even visit. Eleanor wrote back immediately, pouring out all her love and joy and hope for the future. She told Margaret about Mason, about James, about the life she had built in Colorado. She sent a photograph of their little family, taken by a traveling photographer who had passed through Montrose, and she promised that, yes, someday, they would see each other again. The years passed gently at the Double Creek Ranch. Eleanor and Mason welcomed 2 more children, a daughter they named Sarah after Mason's youngest sister, and another son they called Thomas, honoring Mr. Irwin. The little cabin became too small, and they built a larger house on ranch land that Mr. Irwin sold to Mason at a generous price. Mason became a partner in the ranch operation, his hard work and dedication rewarded with a share of the profits. Tommy and Anna Irwin grew up calling Eleanor Aunt Emily, and she loved them as fiercely as her own children. When Tommy was 18, he went away to study agriculture at a university back east, armed with Eleanor's encouragement and belief in education's importance. Anna became a teacher like Miss Wells, who had been her inspiration, and eventually married a banker's son from Denver. Mr. Irwin remarried when James was 5, a widow named Catherine who was kind and practical and became a good friend to Eleanor. The 2 women managed the household together, and Catherine brought her own daughter to blend into their extended family. Margaret visited when James was 7, bringing her husband Daniel and their 3 children. The sisters wept when they saw each other, all the years and pain between them dissolving in their embrace. The visit lasted 2 weeks, and by the end, the cousins were fast friends, and plans were already being made for return visits. Mason's mother and sisters came to visit the following year, a journey that took weeks but was worth every mile. Eleanor met the family that Mason had sacrificed so much for and found them warm and welcoming. Mason's mother hugged Eleanor tightly and whispered, "Thank you for making my son so happy. Thank you for giving him the family he deserves." On their 10th wedding anniversary, Mason surprised Eleanor with a gold locket containing photographs of their 3 children. They sat on the porch of their house, watching the sun set over the mountains, the sounds of their children playing in the yard mixing with the distant lowing of cattle. "Do you ever regret it?" Mason asked softly. "Running away, giving up your real name, all the complications that came with choosing this life?" Eleanor thought about the question seriously. She thought about the frightened young woman who had pressed herself against a cottonwood tree, running from a future she could not bear. She thought about the risks she had taken, the people who had helped her, the love she had found when she stopped running. "Not for a single moment," she said firmly, taking his hand. "You gave me everything I was searching for, Mason. Freedom, love, and a family I chose for myself. You gave me a place to belong when I had nowhere else to go. How could I ever regret that?" "You gave me just as much," Mason said, raising her hand to kiss her knuckles. "You gave me a reason to build something more than just a paycheck to send home. You gave me a home, a family, a future worth fighting for. We saved each other, Emily." She smiled at the name he still used, the identity she had claimed and made her own. Eleanor Easton was someone from her past, a frightened girl who had been brave enough to run. Mason Ingram was who she had become, a woman who had found her strength and her purpose. Both were part of her story, both had value, but she knew which one she truly was now. "We did," she agreed. "We saved each other, and we built something beautiful from all that fear and running. Our children will never know what it is like to feel trapped or powerless. We will teach them to choose their own paths, to fight for their happiness, and to value love over duty every single time." Their children did grow up with those lessons embedded in their hearts. James became a veterinarian, dedicated to caring for animals with the same gentleness his father had shown him. Sarah became a nurse, determined to help people heal, and eventually opened a clinic in Montrose that served the whole community. Thomas followed his father into ranching, but with innovative ideas about conservation and sustainable grazing that he had learned from agricultural journals. Eleanor insisted on subscribing to. All three children grew up knowing they were loved unconditionally, that their choices mattered, and that family was not always defined by blood, but by the people who showed up for you when it mattered most. Eleanor and Mason grew old together on the ranch they had built. Their hair turned gray, their hands became gnarled with arthritis, but their love never diminished. They held hands on the porch every evening, watching their grandchildren play in the yard where their own children had once run. They told stories about the old days, about how they had met, about the community that had protected them, and the love that had sustained them through every hardship. On a warm spring evening, when Eleanor was 72 years old and Mason was 75, they sat together watching the sunset as they had done thousands of times before. Eleanor leaned her head on Mason's shoulder, feeling his arm come around her automatically, a gesture so familiar it was like breathing. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything, for seeing me when I was invisible, for protecting me when I had no one else, for loving me when I did not believe I deserved it. Thank you for giving me a family to belong to." "Thank you for letting me," Mason replied, his voice rough with age but still warm with love. "Thank you for trusting me with your heart. Thank you for building this life with me. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Emily. Every single day for 53 years, you have been the best thing." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Their children and grandchildren were inside preparing dinner, their voices and laughter drifting through the open windows. The ranch stretched around them, prosperous and peaceful, a testament to decades of hard work and dedication. Eleanor thought about the long road that had brought her here, about the frightened young woman running from a fate she could not accept. She thought about the moment she had met Mason's eyes across that dining table in Mrs. Cooper's boarding house, not knowing then that he would become her entire world. She thought about every hard day, every moment of fear, every small victory that had brought them to this perfect evening. "I would do it all again," she said. "Every hard moment, every frightening day, every sacrifice. I would do it all again to end up right here, with you, with this family, with this life." "So would I," Mason said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "So would I, my love." As darkness settled over the ranch and the stars began to appear overhead, they rose together and walked hand in hand into their home, into the warmth and light and love they had created together. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging, witnesses to a love story that had transformed two lost souls into a family, a refuge into a dynasty, and fear into a legacy of hope that would endure for generations. Eleanor Easton had run away from everything she knew, terrified and alone, with no plan beyond survival. But Emily Ingram had found everything she needed by having the courage to accept help, to trust in love, and to build a new life from the ashes of the old. She had been hiding from her family, but Mason Ingram had given her a new one to belong to, and in doing so, had given her the greatest gift imaginable: the freedom to choose her own happiness and the love to make that happiness complete. Their story became part of the ranch's legacy, told and retold to children and grandchildren as an example of courage, love, and the power of choosing your own destiny. The little cabin where they had first lived as newlyweds was preserved as a landmark, and their graves were placed on the hillside overlooking the ranch, side by side as they had been in life. Their headstones simple but profound: Mason Ingram, beloved husband, father, and friend; Emily Ingram, beloved wife, mother, and friend, together forever. And on warm spring evenings, when the sunset painted the sky in brilliant colors, those who lived on the ranch would swear they could feel the presence of the couple who had built it all, still watching over the family they had created, still holding hands as the stars came out, still deeply and eternally in love.